and to the drought. Well, Extinction Rebellion supporters will say, drought, global warming. In fact, Australia's had many droughts. We now have more rain over the century than we did at the start. And as top climate scientists admit, global warming has nothing to do with drought.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid.
But while it has nothing to do with global warming, this latest drought is very serious. And Sky News reporter Andrea Crothers has been spending the week in some of the worst hit areas. She joins me now. Andrea, thank you so much for making time for us. Where have you been this week and what have you seen?
Good evening, Andrew. Well, we started this week up in the Balonne Shire in southern Queensland, out around the areas of Bolen and St George, and we've slowly made our way down from there. Now, these sorts of areas we're talking about, they've been in drought for the best part of 7 years, with only a minor break in between in around 2016. Now, these are areas where you've got people who are hand-feeding stock, or what stock they do have left, and have virtually been restocking a lot over those last years, as they just simply don't have the grass to feed their animals. Now, we've also then gone down through Durham Bandy, obviously a large cotton growing region, a region which normally has the finger pointed at it due to water shortages, being accused of certain things. Now, we've then made our way down here to Coonamble, but one of the things we often focus on when we talk about drought is we talk about the farmers, how they're doing, we talk about the businesses in town, how they're struggling as a result, but there are also other things when it comes to mental health and social well-being. Now, one of the things that I've been talking to locals about today is the number of severe dust storms that have been lashing inland Australia. Now, obviously, the drier, the dustier it gets, the more frequent these dust storms get. Now, some locals we chatted to, they've actually gone to some pretty big lengths to try and keep their houses clean because they say that they simply can't breathe with these dust storms. Here's Leonie Goldsmith.
There's been instances where we've woken up in the middle of the night, hardly able to breathe because the dust has come through, big dust storm, night time, waking up and think, you know, it's hard to take a breath.
Andrea,
now,
this...
Andrea, often for a lot of people...
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, Andrea, often for a lot of people, it's often their backyard that's their oasis, whether it be their tiny little bit of lawn they can keep for those who do have bore water so they can keep it alive. But often when it comes to these sorts of dust storms, it really makes it hard for locals to escape the reality of these harsh conditions.
Andrea, the hardship there is terrible that we've been seeing. The drought overall, how many farmers and how much of our farmland is it affecting?
Well, it's really hard to put an exact figure on just how many farmers are in drought, but if we look at the rainfall deficiencies over particularly the past couple of years, it is mostly affecting eastern Australia. That's most of Queensland, a large chunk of New South Wales, eastern South Australia. And we're also looking at northwest Victoria, the East Gippsland of Victoria, and then also the east coast of Tasmania. Now, according to the BOM, the 33 months up to September, the rainfall in the Murray-Darling Basin, particularly northern, was the driest on record.
Now, we've had pretty severe droughts before. Obviously, the Federation drought more than a century ago. There was another terrible drought in the 60s. How does this compare to some of those droughts?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Now, that Federation drought is regarded as the worst drought on record, where we saw sheep numbers which were at the time up over 100 million, plummet to half of that. And then the 60s drought, as you said, regarded as the second worst because of the sheer size of it. Now, with regards to this drought, whilst it isn't over all of Australia, for those who are in the eastern parts of Australia, if you at least chat to those on the ground who have families that have been there for many generations, they say that it's the prolonged nature of this drought and how unexpected it was to be so long that's really making it take a hit for them.
And what's the government, you know, obviously people want to help. What's the government at the moment offering farmers to get them through this?
Well, Andrew, the government's been very keen to talk up the $7 billion in drought support that it's rolling out, but most of that actually is all tied up in that $5 billion future drought fund, which only recently obviously went through Parliament. Now, as for the other money that is on the ground, well, we saw recently Scott Morrison out at Dalby announcing a further $100 million. Now, that was tied up in terms of extra $1 million grants for councils to help them with their local economic stimulus. There's also $3,000 grants that would be delivered through salvos and that for those on the ground who are doing it tough to help pay their bills. Obviously, one of the biggest headline acts of their drought support is that farm household allowance, but that's also come with further criticism. The Centrelink payment, which is rolled out like Newstart, it is only actually being accessed by a third of farmers who are actually eligible for it, with a lot sort of claiming that it's very difficult to access, difficult to get through. And then recently today we've seen a lot of people have been booted off it because they've reached that 4-year limit, with many farmers calling for it to be extended. Now, if we look at then a state and local level, there are other measures such as grants or freight fodder subsidies, but it really varies between the different states there. But I guess the one overwhelming thing we do hear from farmers is that they do want more done, but they also think that the government's been dragging their heels with it.
Andrea Crothers, thank you so much for that terrific wrap and for all your work this week, because in the cities it's sometimes very easy to ignore what's going on in the vast countryside, and I'm glad that you've done your bit, so thank you so much indeed.